Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be going over all of the basics of Python to show you how it works and how to do some cool stuff with it. So Python's a great programming language because it's super user-friendly and it doesn't have all of that boilerplate code that other languages make you memorize. So it's very intuitive. To get started, as you guys can see, I have my Python script opened up inside of the Python explained folder, and we have a file called main.py. So just a heads up, if you ever want to write Python code, just make sure the file that you create has a .py extension so that your computer knows this is a Python script. And the first thing we're going to be going over is something that's very useful, and it's called the print statement. So what the print statement does is essentially whenever you run your Python project, it's going to display any word or sentence down below in the output. So for example, we can go ahead and type in print, parentheses, quotation marks, and then hello world. And now if we press the run button, as you guys can see down below in the output, we get hello world printed back to us. So the structure of a print statement is going to be the word print itself, then you're going to need a pair of parentheses on the outside of the quotation mark string that you pass into it. So in Python, there's a data type called a string, which can essentially store any text or phrase as long as it's stored within two quotation marks. And another cool feature of Python is instead of using two quotation marks, you can also just use one. And as long as they match each other, it's going to work the exact same way. So if we press run and have a single quotation mark, so an apostrophe around them, we'll still get the exact same output and everything's working just fine. So this right here is called a print statement. And like we said, it essentially just displays whatever you put in the quotation marks down below in the output. The next thing I want to show you guys is something that's very similar to the print statement, but it's also going to allow us to ask the user to type something back to us. So this statement is called input, and so we can go ahead and type in input, and then just like up above, we're going to have a pair of parentheses and quotation marks, and now we're going to be asking the user a question. So we can go ahead and say something like, what's your name? And so you'll notice that I added an extra space right here, and the reason for this is whenever we press run, Python is going to be waiting for the user to type something back, and adding this space just makes sure that whatever they type back doesn't stick to the message we're printing to them. So now if we press run, what you'll notice is it says hello world, just like from the first time, and then we get another message saying what's your name, and if I click down below, it'll give us a blinking cursor indicating that it's waiting for us to give it some information back. So now I can go ahead and type in my name. I'll type in EID, so EID, press enter. And now Python has retrieved whatever value, so my name, back into the project. So using input lets us prompt the user to give us some information back, and then using print simply displays that information without expecting anything in return. And so now what you'll notice though is as soon as we got our, the user's name printed back, the project ended and we didn't actually do anything with it. Which kind of brings us to our next concept, which is called variables. So Python has variables that are going to be letting us store information inside of keywords that we can generate on our own. So for example, I can go ahead and say number is equal to 10. And so what I've done here is I've created a number variable that is equal to the number 10. And as you guys can see, so we've just typed in the number 10 without any quotation marks or anything, so Python knows that this number 10 is an integer. We can also do variables for strings, kind of like up above where we have hello world. So I can say, for example, name equals in quotation marks EID. So now I've stored my name as a string because I gave it extra quotation marks, and it's stored inside of the variable name. And the cool thing about variables is that you can actually use them later on in the code, and whenever you use it, it's going to just go ahead and retrieve whatever value it's set equal to. So if you guys remember with the print statement, the way it works is we just say print parentheses and then we pass in a string. But since the name variable is set equal to a string, I can actually go ahead and say print parentheses name without quotation marks. And so now Python is going to know that this name variable is going to correspond with the name on line number 6, and what it's going to do is find the value and then print that instead. So instead of getting name printed back, we're going to be getting the value that name is assigned to. So if I press run now, it's still going to ask us for my name, so I'll go ahead and type in EID, and now if I run it, it prints back EID. Now don't get confused because the E that's printed back on the last line is not going to be the same one that we retrieved up here. But if we wanted it to be the same one, what we can go ahead and do is instead of saying name equals ed inside of the quotation marks, I can go ahead and delete that, and then I'm going to move the input statement. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it, and then paste it right after the equal sign. And so the line's going to say name equals input, what's your name? And so now what's going to happen is we'll start off by saying print hello world, so we'll get hello world printed back. And then we're going to go ahead and ask the user to tell us what their name is. So whenever they type in their name, whatever name they print back to us is what we're going to print on the next line. So now if I run this, and whenever it asks me for my name, I go ahead and I can say Bob, for example. If I press enter, it's going to print Bob on the next line. And what we can actually do with this is we can customize the output. And so instead of just saying Bob, we can say, hello Bob, it's nice to meet you. And so to do that, what we can go ahead and do is add a phrase before Bob's name. So we can say hello inside of quotation marks. Then we're going to add a comma to tell Python we want to print two pieces of information. So the first one is the word hello. The next one is going to be Bob's name. And then after Bob's name, we want to go ahead and print out it's nice to meet you. So you can go ahead and add new quotation marks and say it's nice to meet you. And one thing I want to quickly point out with this print statement right here is, as you guys can see, we have a single apostrophe inside of the string. So if you were to retype this out and instead of using double quotes, using single quotes, you're going to be getting an error. So even though you are allowed to use single quotes, if you do want to use them, you want to make sure the string you're passing into it doesn't have single quotes of its own, because then Python is going to think that's the end of the string. So now that we've gotten this taken care of, let me go ahead and click run. And so now we should see this sentence printed back. And instead of seeing the variable name, we're going to be seeing the user's name that we type in. So whenever it asks us what our name is, we can go ahead and say Billy Joe, press enter, and now it'll say, hello Bill Joe, it's nice to meet you. So hopefully that makes sense. So now that we've gotten print statements, input statements, and variables out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and show you another Python concept called an if statement. And so what an if statement is essentially it'll check to see if a certain condition is true, and then if that condition is true, we'll be doing certain code, whereas if that condition is false, then we'll be doing something else. So it kind of gives us multiple options. For example, what we can go ahead and do is let me comment out all this code. So what I'm going to do is highlight everything and press command /, and now everything is going to be commented. And what I mean by commented is now if we press run, it's going to ignore all of this code, and we're not going to get anything down below in the output. So now whenever we run new code, it'll just skip everything we've already done. And so to explain if statements, let's go ahead and ask the user to tell us how old they are. So for example, we'll go ahead and say user's age equals input, how old are you? Just like that. So now whenever we press run, we'll see this printed back, and then we'll be waiting for the project or the program to retrieve the user's age. Now one thing I do want to mention is that since we're using the input function, whenever the user types in their age, Python is going to store it as a string. So even though they're typing in a number, Python's going to think they're typing in a word. So to go ahead and take care of that, what we're going to go ahead and say is user's age is equal to int parentheses user's age. So what this line right here is doing is converting the string data type of their age into an integer, since we wrapped it in parentheses and then put int, which is short for integer. So now after line 13, whenever we use user's age, we'll be getting a number of their age as opposed to a string. And the reason that comes in handy is for explaining what we're going to be doing in the if statement. So essentially what we're going to be doing now is if their age is greater than 18, we'll print that they're an adult. If the age is between 13 and 18, we'll print that they are a teenager. And then if the age is less than 13, we're going to be printing that they are a child. So what we can go ahead and do to simulate that is say if user's age is greater than 18, then we'll be adding a colon and pressing enter. And now we'll go ahead and print out you are an adult, just like that. So now if they type in any number that's greater than 18, we'll be executing this print statement and then printing out the message you are an adult. Let's go ahead and just check to see that work. So let's go ahead and check to see if this works. And so now it says, how old are you? I'm going to go ahead and put 30, press enter, and now it says you are an adult. So that's fantastic. Now what if they typed in a number that's less than 18? So if we press run right now, and we type in like 10 for example, what you'll see is we don't get anything printed back. Because whenever it checked if this if statement was true, it got a value of false, and then it didn't continue on to the next line. It just skipped line 16 altogether and did nothing. So to make sure that anyone who runs this gets some output, we're going to go ahead and add another condition. So now we can go ahead and add another if statement, and we'll say if user's age is greater than or equal to 13, and then we'll say and user's age is less than or equal to 18. Now we'll be inside of this if statement, and it's going to be true if these two conditions evaluate to true. So for example, if the user's age is 14, well 14 is greater than 13, so that checks off, and 14 is less than 18, so that checks off as well. And so then we'll be going into the print statement that associates with this if statement, and we can go ahead and print out the message you are a teenager, just like that. And then lastly, we're going to have one last if statement saying if user's age is less than 13, then what we're going to go ahead and do is print out you are a child, just like that. And so now if we go ahead and give this a run, it's going to go ahead and prompt us asking us how old we are. So if I type in an age of 15, for example, and press enter, it'll print out you are a teenager because 15 is not greater than 18, so it skips this line. 15 is greater than 13, and 15 is less than 18, so it executes this line. And then when it checks if 15 is less than 13, it gets false, so it skips this line. And just to go ahead and test it one last time, with the younger age, we can go ahead and say we're 10, press enter, and now we'll see that it prints out you are a child, because the first two if statements are false with an age of 10, but the last one, since 10 is less than 13, evaluates to true, causing this line to execute. So that's how if statements work. One way that we could actually make the code that we did here a little bit shorter, well, there's actually two ways we can make it shorter. So the first is, as you can see, we have this yellow squiggly line under this condition because we took the long approach, and it says we can actually simplify the chained comparison. And the way we can actually do that is, maybe if you remember math class, whenever they used to kind of have like a number is less than another number, which is less than a third number, we can actually follow the same notation inside of an if statement. So instead of separately checking if the user's age is greater than 13, and then also checking if user's age is less than 18, we can combine them into one if statement by getting rid of all of this, and then instead of checking this right off the bat, we're going to go ahead and say 18 is greater than or equal to user's age. So this condition right here will be doing the exact same work as the previous one was doing. Another thing I want to mention is that Python also has something called Elif statements, which is short for else if. And what that's going to let you do is combine these three if statements into a group together. So if I go ahead and I add the letters EL right before this if statement, we're only going to check this code if the first one was false. And then if the first one evaluates to true, we're actually just going to go ahead and skip this condition altogether. And so that's just going to make the project run a little bit quicker and save the computer the effort of checking things that we know are never going to be true if something before it was already true. Because if the user's age is greater than 18, then there's no way the user's age is also going to be less than 18 at the same time. And that brings us to our last if statement right here. And since the first if statement checks every single age that's greater than 18, and then the second elif statement checks all the ages between 13 and 18, the only valid ages that are left are going to be children's ages who are less than 13 years old. So instead of actually checking to see if user's age is less than 13, we can get rid of all of this and simply say else. And so now what's going to be happening in this group of if statements is exactly the same as before, but it's just a little bit cleaner. It's a lot less typing, but it still does the exact same thing. Because if, for example, we pass in an age of 10, it's going to check if 10 is less than 18, which is false. So it goes to the next Elif statement. Is 10 less than 18? Yes. Is 10 greater than 13? No. So this is false. And then it's just going to automatically jump down to else and print out you are a child. Just to simulate one more age, we could go ahead and try out 15. So if user's age is greater than 18, well, 15 is not. So we'll skip this. We'll come down to the next Elif statement. Is 15 between 18 and 13? It is, so it executes this print statement. And then since one of the previous if statements up here were true, we're not going to execute else. Else only runs if everything before it was false. So now we can go ahead and click on run, check out the output, and if we type in number 10, for example, now it'll say you're a child. If we type in 20, it prints out you are an adult. And then if we check out 15, you'll see that it says you are a teenager. And now the last thing that I want to show you guys how to do is something that's called a for loop. So imagine if we wanted to check the ages of 50 people, right? Instead of us copying and pasting all of these lines of code 50 times, what we can go ahead and actually do is just throw it all inside of a for loop. It's going to save us the effort of having to repeat this in our code itself. It'll still perform the code 50 times, but it's not going to make us type it out that often. And so to make a for loop in Python, you're going to be using the keyword for, just like this. Then you're going to make a variable name. So we can go ahead and just call this number. Then we'll be using the keyword in, just like that. And now we have two options. We can either pass in a list name, so a variable that's equal to a list, or we can pass in a function called range. And then inside of here, we'll pass in the number of times we want to loop through something. So if I go ahead and type in 50, now what we can do is we'll be checking every single age between 0 and 50. So before actually doing anything too difficult with the for loop, I'm just going to go ahead and comment out the if statement from earlier and then print out numbers so you can visualize what this for loop is doing. So if we go ahead and press run, what you'll see in the output is we get every number between 0 and 49 printed back, and this is actually based off of the fact that we passed in the number 50 right here. So you might be confused as to why we don't get 50 printed as well, but the reason for this is the range function is asking us how many numbers we want, and since it starts off at the number 0, there's actually going to be 50 values whenever it gets to the number 49, and if we added the number 50 to it, then we would actually be getting back 51 numbers. So that's why it's a little bit off. But what the cool thing about using the range function with a for loop is that for each iteration, the variable number is going to be equal to a number between the range of 0 to the number we pass in here. So it's going to start off at 0, it'll do the code that we tell it to do, then it's going to update and add one to itself, and then it'll become 1, and then 2, 3, and so on and so forth until it reaches the maximum number that we specified, which in this case is going to be 49. And so if, for example, we wanted to do the code that we did earlier as far as asking the user how old they are and then telling them if they're an adult, teenager, or child 50 times, we could actually copy all of this and then paste it right here inside of the for loop. Make sure we uncomment everything and then tab it over, so we can press Command / to uncomment and then press tab to shift it over. And then shifting it over is telling Python that all of this code is going to be happening during each iteration of the for loop that we created. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these empty lines. And now if we run this, what you'll see is we're going to be prompted with how old are you. I can go ahead and type in 10, press enter, it'll say you're a child, and then it's going to ask us again. So if I type in 20, it'll say you're an adult, 30, you're an adult, 15, and it's going to keep looping over and over again until it asks us and tells us the proper feedback a total of 50 times, because that's what we specified inside the for loop itself. So I know this was a pretty quick overview of Python, but I just wanted to show you some of the cool things that you can do with just a little bit of knowledge with this language. There's a ton more stuff that goes into Python out there, but these are some of the bare essentials that are the building blocks of the Python language itself. So hopefully you learned a lot, hopefully you found it interesting, and hopefully this inspires you to keep on learning Python. Have a great day, guys.